Yes, we've got Dr. John in from Creation Ministries International, and it's great to see you, Dr. John. We haven't had you in for a while.
Mick, it's great to be here. It's great to be back again. I really appreciate the fact that I've been able to come in.
Yeah.
But I tell you what, I really do appreciate the fact that we've had the other creation speakers here.
Yep.
That has been fantastic. And everybody who's been listening for the last 3 weeks, what a privilege to have Mark James from New Zealand. I mean, what he said was just fantastic. And everybody who's heard him should have been really encouraged that we have a certainty in our Christian faith.
Yeah.
You know, because the sort of things that he talked about, the little motors that we have going on in our cells, you know, it's absolutely amazing. And I know he sent them to you, and you put them out on Facebook.
Oh, fantastic.
They really were fantastic. And he explained really well what is actually going on at a cellular level. And I mean, it's not microscopic, it's submicroscopic. It's at a molecular level.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing from a creation point of view is that, you know, in Darwin's day, they didn't have the faintest idea that this is the sort of thing that was going on. You know, they had ordinary light microscopes, and they'd have a look at a piece of biological tissue, and they see cells, and they see this little dark blob in the middle called the nucleus, and it didn't seem too complicated to them, and so they thought, oh, well, you know, it could pretty easily have evolved without any creator. You know, they did not have a clue what really was going on at cellular level in our bodies. And truly, Mark talked about those animations, and of course, they're not Christian animations. They've been produced by secular universities like Harvard and so on. So, but they really do show exactly what is going on there.
And when you hear about, you know, it all started with a little single cellular sort of thing, and we evolved from there. Yeah, that sounds fine if a cell is a single blob. But until you see what's inside a cell, it's like a whole world in there.
It is, and I mean, if you walked into a modern car factory and you saw all of these robots doing everything, completely assembling the cars, you know, and you wouldn't see anybody hanging around, you know, but you would know that somewhere there's a control room with this massive bank of computers that is controlling all of those robots that are building the car right from the ground up, you know. And when you have a look at what's going on in the cell, you know that somewhere there's a control room, and somebody has written a program that is causing it to go that way. And it is so much more complicated and sophisticated than a robotized car factory.
Yeah.
You know? and I mean, it's got built-in corrections and quality control systems and so on. And it's all done with little electric motors that are 100% efficient.
Yes.
I mean, man can't get anywhere near that.
No.
You know, but there it is. It's all going on. It's going on in our cells day after day after day from the moment we're born in every cell of our bodies.
I just loved looking at the animations. The little guy that walks along with the sack over his shoulder. I mean, these are real. They've actually seen these with electron microscopes. They've seen these little guys walking along. You sort of think, man, there's thousands of them inside a single cell.
Yeah, and yet to do that, he walks along a road that gets built in front of him, and then gets disassembled behind him.
Yes.
You know, to conserve all the stuff that's there, so that it can be recycled.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't do anything like that.
Yeah. If you don't believe in a creator after seeing some of those videos, and of course, as you said, they're put together. A lot of them, like, you know, Harvard University, and you sort of think that these guys aren't Christian, but somehow they just haven't seen or heard the truth yet.
Yeah, and look, that is really what it's all about. They know and they observe this stuff, but they're still able to deny the existence of God. Mm-hmm. And but look, we've all been there. I was there. I probably didn't know it quite as well as they do, but Mark made the very valid point that all science type courses teach evolution as if it's a fact, when really it hasn't got anything factual to go on. But as he also said, it doesn't even enter into the day-to-day activity of any scientist in any field. He was an organic chemist, and evolution didn't have anything to do with his day-to-day work. In the medical field, which I was, evolution didn't have anything to do with day-to-day work. For geologists or like Taz Walker or, Mark Harwood, who's a satellite engineer, didn't even enter into their day-to-day activity. But, of course, they had to learn it and they had to believe it, and it's taught by professors who were taught by professors who believed it, even though it doesn't have any bearing on their day-to-day activity.
When you learnt evolution yourself at university, they obviously don't have these little electron microscope videos to teach evolution. They can't go back in time to do that. So how do you actually believe it? What do they say that is so believable? I have talked about this years ago on this program, the lies in the textbooks. I've talked about those diagrams of the embryos that came out of Germany a little bit after Darwin. Supposedly how all developing embryos looked the same at the same stage of development, and it was all a lie. The drawings that the German embryologist came up with, he made them up. That doesn't bear any relation to the truth. Yeah. And yet it was in all the textbooks for 100 years or more. In fact, it's still there. You still see it around the place. And various other things like the supposed evolution of the horse. I was persuaded by this stuff. Now, I didn't know anything about the evolution of the horse. I just saw it in a textbook, and because it's in a textbook, well, it's got to be right, hasn't it? Textbooks wouldn't lie to you. Oh, yeah? Well, they do. They're full of lies and deceit. And that sort of stuff is persisting even to this very day. And so children are indoctrinated with stuff that is absolutely not true. Yeah, it really is tragic. It's interesting what you say, Dr. John. You learn so much based on science for your medical degree. There's a lot of science in that. But then some of the stuff they've taught you, the evolutionary stuff, was just words on paper. There was no experiments to actually show you any working science there. So really, it's just a theory. So they're teaching both theory and science, and it's the science side of things that makes you a doctor, I guess. But the theory stuff, I guess that's why you've changed since you've decided to follow Christ rather than believe a lie.
I really didn't have any choice. I didn't find the Lord; He found me. But right up until that time, I was an evolutionist, but having become a Christian and knowing that God really was true, then it was obvious to me that the Bible had to be true because that was His word, and so the Bible was completely different in terms of its history and its time frame than I'd been led to believe, and I realised, I've got to believe what the Bible says, and having made that decision, I then became aware of an organisation like Creation Ministries, and it was Creation Ministries that I became aware of, and started to subscribe to their stuff. And of course, over the years that I've been a subscriber, right from the very beginning, I mean, it has just shown me how nonsensical and fragile the foundation of evolution really is. And when you look at the evidence for creation, it is just overwhelming. And when we've often talked about the time frame that the Book of Genesis talks about. The 6,000 years. Now that is what it says. And as Mark James said, it's not a salvation issue, but it is a question of authority. Is the Bible authoritative? And if it is, then as a Christian, you ought to accept it at face value. And you shouldn't, and as so many Christian churches do, play around with the evolutionists, because they really don't have a shred of evidence for what they believe. And what we have is a Bible and the Word of God. So really, that's the sort of thing that we ought to be focused on.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it intriguing that so many of you guys with Creation Ministries are, doctors and chemists and PhDs, and you've all at one stage, or not all of you, but a lot of you at one stage were, I guess, very strong believers in evolution. And when it comes to your actual chosen profession, doctors, chemists, all that sort of thing, you've dropped the evolutionary thing, but you didn't drop being a doctor. You didn't say, oh, no, that's all wrong. I'm going to believe in evolution and all the doctor's stuff's wrong, or all the chemist stuff's wrong. No, it's the evolution stuff, because I guess you've studied both. You've seen both at university, but only one rang true. It is 27 minutes past 4. We're with Dr. John from Creation 5, and we have Dr. John in the studio from Creation Ministries International. Of course, if you have any questions, you can send them, or rather, you can just go to the website, creation.com. There's thousands of answers to thousands of questions online. However, if you have a question, we'd love to hear it. Send it through, because chances are there's other people with the same question. Simply text 0401 949 949. I know a couple of people have tried calling. That doesn't work. We don't answer the calls. We only get the SMSs. So if you can, just SMS 0401 949 949. Now, Dr. John, one of the questions we asked last week, Mark, and he was pretty awesome with just about every answer there was, but one on mRNA I'd like to ask you. But first, just talking about news that we've seen online in the last couple of weeks. One story I saw in particular, it said Webb, as in the James Webb Telescope, finds potentially habitable exoplanet, which might be an ocean world. And, of course, humanity spends billions of dollars looking for somewhere to stretch out, and maybe the human race can sort of move to another planet as well. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. Now, I'm not bad at maths, Dr. John.
Yeah.
They said it's 120 light years away.
Well,
I worked out
that's pretty close. Yeah.
I worked out that'll take us 120,000 years to get there.
Yeah. Well, we would want to start fairly soon if we want to make it, wouldn't we?
Yes. Yep, I guess so. Well, we're going to need a faster rocket. But if I remember correctly, you said something once about if a rocket was to travel, even at the speed of light, it'd still take 120 years. If it could travel that fast, if it hit a speck of dust, it would disintegrate.
That's right. Yeah, the faster you go, the worse the impact of a tiny collision. And look, they paint beautiful pictures of these possible exoplanets, and I mean, they think they might have found one, and it might be habitable, and it might have water. Yep. But then the artist comes along and draws a picture of what it might look like.
The artist drew an awesome picture. But it did actually say, Here's an illustration showing what exoplanet K2-18b might look like in orbit around its star.
Yeah, well, it's the might is a very, very big word in those circumstances.
Yeah. But I mean, even if it did, the chance of us getting there is pretty slim.
I think it is, Mick. Yeah.
All right.
But anyway.
Okay, now the other thing, we spoke last week with Mark about mRNA.
Yeah.
And I asked, is we're watching these videos of these little tiny machines that are sort of playing with mRNA and building it and doing all sorts of stuff, and I was wondering how that related to the vaccines.
Yeah, well, look, it's worth talking about again because that animation about protein synthesis, I mean, it is so fantastic. And when you think about what the animation showed, you know, we all know the diagram of DNA as being a bit like a twisted ladder.
Yep.
And the rungs of the ladder are the nucleotide bases, one on each side, so 2 per rung.
Yep.
And you can also imagine it a bit like a twisted zipper, same sort of thing with, you know, the 2 sides of the zipper joined up.
Oh, yeah.
But your body knows if it's going to make a protein, it knows where on the DNA is the code for that particular protein. Mm-hmm. And so this little guy runs along the zipper until he finds the spot where the code begins. And we're talking about a code of maybe 10,000 letters. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not small, right? Yep. So then he unzips it, and then he brings in some other nucleotide bases, which we call messenger RNA, and it makes a copy of the program. Yep. Right? And once it's made the copy of the program, he then zips it up again, right? And that copy then comes out of the DNA, and it goes into the cell into a structure called a ribosome. Yep. And it gets fed into the ribosome. It's a piece of code, right? And according to the code, other pieces of RNA called transfer RNA bring along particular amino acids and line them up along that code so that they make a protein. Yep. And then other proteins called chaperones then cart it off and feed it into another cellular structure where it gets folded into the right shape, a bit like a key, so it can do its job. Mm. I mean, it is just absolutely amazing.
Yep.
Well, do the vaccines work in a similar way? Yes, they do work similarly, but what they are, they're actually a direct injection of a piece of computer-generated RNA. So it's a computer-generated code, mm-hmm. and once that's injected, that gets fed into your ribosome. So the technology, which is pretty smart, you know, it's utilising your body's structures like these ribosomes, which are already there, which God created.
Yep.
And it feeds this artificial piece of RNA into that, and out pops a protein supposedly identical to the spike protein on the surface of the coronavirus.
Wow.
Right? And when your body sees that protein that you have produced yourself, yep. according to the code that's been fed into the ribosome, when your body sees that, it recognises it as a foreign protein. It's not one of the normal ones that we're supposed to have.
Yep.
So then it produces antibodies against that particular protein. Mm-hmm. Or this is the theory. And hopefully then, if the virus itself attacks you with its spike proteins on the outside, like all those little spikes that we've all
the
seen.
Pictures all the time.
Yep. Then you've already got antibodies against it, so you'll attack it and you'll destroy it. Mm. That's the theory. But it hasn't worked out all that well in practice because viruses mutate quite a lot, mm-hmm. and the the antibody that you've produced against the original piece of messenger RNA doesn't necessarily work so well against all the mutant variants that pop along.
Yeah.
So you've had to have boosters and boosters and boosters and boosters and ad infinitum, really. And of course, there's a few other issues as well. And one of them, let's take, for example, the proteins that we do make for ourselves.
Yep.
Things like hormones. Hormones are proteins like insulin and adrenaline and estrogen, testosterone, all of these things, they are proteins.
Mm-hmm.
Well, your body knows that particular organs get to produce them. I mean, it's your pancreas that it tells to produce insulin, and it's your adrenals that it tells to produce adrenaline, and so on. Well, when you've had the injection of the messenger RNA in this supposed vaccine, well, it doesn't necessarily know where to go, because it's a foreign piece. So sometimes it ends up in places that you might not want it to end up in. And, although the theory behind the technology is very, very good, in practice it's had a lot of issues. And, I probably wouldn't want to explore them too much on this program because it gets a bit political. But yeah, there's issues that could be discussed in some other forum.
Yeah. One thing I did notice in the news today, there was a headline that said, "Why, yes, there is a new version of coronavirus. Should you be worried? No." And I thought, wow, that was something Dr. John said ages ago, like way back at the start of the whole COVID thing. Over time, these things tend to wear themselves out. They lose information and they're just not as good anymore.
Yeah, the mutants are usually not as powerful as the original. And as they mutate, they generally get weaker rather than stronger.
Yeah.
So, I would say that it's not a case for panic.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. Now, of course, we did put those little videos that we've been talking about onto the Radio with Mick Facebook page. If you wanted to have a look at these little videos of all these amazing little machines that are working inside the cells that are doing all this stuff, and to be able to see how this coding inside a cell actually works. One, it'll blow your mind looking at the pictures. Two, I did read about the videos, and they said, one of the only things they've actually changed in the video is they've given it colour. And, of course, when they're looking through the electron microscope, it doesn't have that colour. So they've given it colour just so as you can see the different pieces doing their job. But you can imagine without the colour, it's the same sort of thing, all these little things doing their work, and absolutely amazing. And as far as I'm concerned, it just proves that there must be a creator out there that has put this together, because it's way too intricate to be an accident. Yeah,
well, I mean, it wouldn't look so good on black and white television, would it, Mick? So, on colour television, you see quite a bit more, and it's a bit more spectacular. Yeah. And I suppose that's really the difference. So they've had to colour it up.
Yep. Yeah, well, that was absolutely amazing. I think that, asking you again about that was probably a smart thing to do, because, of course, you're the doctor.
Yeah, well, people are very interested. I mean, we all now have heard of messenger RNA or mRNA, and everybody's been encouraged to get vaccinated with it.
Yeah, and we've seen the pictures so many times of all those little things in there, and yeah, it's interesting. We're learning more about it every day. But again, we used to learn when I was a kid, life started with a little cellular single cell blob, basically, and it evolved from there. And I just keep going back to that, that little single cell. It's got so many thousands of little working parts and motors in there, and like any motor, take one little piece out of your car motor and see if it still goes. Just take one piece out. Don't go anymore. It's the same with these little things, for them to all have accidentally just happened all at the same time.
Mick, it's just impossible. And I was thinking before I came on the program today, one of the analogies, okay, now all our watches are electronic because we've all got batteries, but if you go back a few years, we had such things as Swiss watches. And Swiss watches were amazing pieces of engineering.
Yep.
And it would be obvious looking at a Swiss watch that that didn't evolve. It had to have all of the little cogs and springs and everything else in it designed by an intelligent designer. And of course it was. And it's exactly the same, really, with the cell. There is so much tiny machinery in there that it could never have evolved. There's just absolutely no way. It had to have the most amazing designer in the outside the universe, actually, and that's God.
It's a good example, the Swiss watch, because you think about pulling it apart and you might have a few hundred parts in there. I don't know. But every one of these little tiny motors inside the cell has got way more parts. And there's thousands of them.
That's right.
Inside every cell.
And there's cogs and wheels and clutches and things like outboard motors. Look, it is just so amazing. And we use most of our electric motors are electron motors, but the cell is a proton motor.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah, it's still electric though. It's absolutely amazing. Well, Dr. John, we're slightly over time. Thank you. Another awesome week. And of course, talking about these little motors always gets me excited.
Yeah. Well, I'm on again next week, Mick. So hopefully some people might send in a few questions to our text line.
Yes,
and we can have a look at them next week.
Absolutely, and the number for that is 0401 949 949. Just send a text, SMS 0401 949 949, and Dr. John can answer your questions next week. Well, thank you again, Dr. John. Another awesome week.
Look forward to coming in next week.
Awesome. It is 8 minutes to 5. You're on 94.9.